Council, we're going to move on to the next item of tonight's agenda, which is item 3.2. This is the Seymour Trail Strategic Planning session. Now, typically in council workshop, it is a workshop for council. It's not necessarily a public hearing. We've had a tremendous amount of public interest in this matter, and I have 5 people signed up to speak. And we normally would wait until the end of the period of time to include public comments. I'm proposing that we vary it and get these representatives in at the front end of this section. Is there any objection to that? Sorry, is that support or objection, Councillor Beck?
I support that idea.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we'll go with that. And so what we'll do is actually we'll just have the staff make the initial comment, and then I'll go to the 5 names that I have on the list here.
I guess that's over to me, Your Worship.
Yes, Mr. Joyce.
Your Worship, tonight our Parks Department is presenting an overview of the Seymour Trail Strategic Plan, which the district intends to initiate in 2021. This is a long-term plan with the goal to provide an overarching framework for sustainable community trail plan that will balance recreational use and environmental sustainability in the Seymour area. This presentation is a little longer for staff tonight, about 15 to 20 minutes, but I really believe, Your Worship, it's important that council hear this full story. It's a really important bit of work. And it'll give council a really good sense of where we are. As you mentioned, there has been a lot of interest in the community. I would stress at this early stage, this is really the start of the process. Reading through all the interviews or the emails on the weekend, there was some sense it was the end, but this is very much the start of a 2-year process we're proposing. So once we've had the speakers speak, Your Worship, I will be turning it over to Mr. Maskell to make the presentation.
We'll go to the staff presentation first. So Mr. Maskell, if you want to do your presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Wayne Maskell, and I'm the Section Manager of Natural Parkland. Tonight I'll present an update on the work that the Parks Department has undertaken over the past 2 years towards the strategic plan for Seymour Mountain and the path forward in creating a sustainable trail network which is accessible to as many users as possible while protecting the environment in this sensitive area. The district has over 130 kilometers of inventoried trails between Fromme Mountain and Mount Seymour. Approximately 60 kilometers exist on Fromme, with another 70 on Seymour. While the trails on Fromme are very concentrated, the trails on Seymour are spread out over a much larger land base, which is overseen by multiple land managers and is in a considerably more environmentally sensitive zone. On the map, both sanctioned trails indicated in green and unsanctioned trails indicated in red are shown. As you can see, the majority of the trails on Fromme are sanctioned, and most of the mountain bike trails are maintained under a service agreement with the North Shore Mountain Bike Association. In contrast, the vast majority of the trails on Seymour are considered unsanctioned, meaning they've never been formally adopted by the district, for a host of reasons that I'll touch on throughout my presentation. Currently, no service agreements are in place for widespread trail maintenance on Seymour. Mount Seymour contains an extensive network of predominantly unsanctioned trails, which tend to draw a vast number of trail users of all types. Recreational use has steadily increased over the past decade, with hiking and biking being the main activities. As the majority of these trails are unsanctioned, they receive only minimal amounts of maintenance and upkeep. A few authorized trails have been adopted by NSMBA trail builders who work on a volunteer basis. However, there is currently no paid trail maintenance on Seymour. Seymour is a very challenging area which has made the development of a strategic trail plan somewhat difficult. There are competing land ownerships with multiple jurisdictions. The district, Metro Van, BC Parks, CMHC, and BC Hydro have a patchwork of land ownership that is further complicated by private adjacent properties, as well as district leased lands and First Nations land claims on federal lands. Many of the trails on Seymour traverse several jurisdictions, which present unique challenges with respect to trail construction and maintenance agreements. Additionally, there are competing recreational uses on Seymour. Few trails are currently dedicated for individual trail use groups, and as such, there are occasionally conflicts on trails. Terrain on Seymour presents many challenges, and to date, only one all-access trail exists on Lower Seymour. The terrain and geography of Seymour is very different from that found on Fromme. Whereas Fromme has a fairly uniform ecosystem, Seymour has a wide variety of highly sensitive ecosystem areas that require and deserve protection before they are lost forever. There are many more creeks, streams, and wetlands, as well as older, more developed forest ecosystems that make trail planning difficult. Staff will be considering these factors very carefully in developing any strategic trail plan in this area. Due to its geography and topography, access to Seymour is not nearly as easy as Fromme. With the exception of the Berkeley-Hannes and Deep Cove areas, trailheads for large portions of the trail network are not within walking or biking distance of many neighborhoods. Vehicle access is required, and while there are a few parking lots on Lower Seymour, as you move east along Indian River Road, parking is not readily available and further complicated by leased lands in the Sunshine Falls community. This community is only accessible via a private gated road. Residents of this community routinely report conflict with cyclists who are either exiting trails onto the private road or traveling down the road in search of trailheads. Over the past 2 years, the Parks Department has been taking steps towards a framework for a strategic plan for the Seymour area. This has been an ambitious and arduous task, as currently the Parks Department does not have dedicated staff resources to work on this project. All of the work that has been done to date has been completed through a combination of summer hires and existing staff working part-time. As you saw in the previous slides, the trail network on Seymour is vast, with many unsanctioned trails popping up fairly frequently. As such, an accurate and up-to-date map of the trails has been a challenge for staff. In 2018 and 19, staff were assigned to the task of inventorying every trail on Seymour. Armed with GPS and laptops, 2 staff mapped the entire network of trails on district land and those lands that had trails that led onto district property. Mapping was only the first step, however. While on trail, staff also completed a thorough assessment of conditions from an environmental standpoint. In 2019, while completing the inventory, staff were also tasked with completing an assessment of all the built features on these trails. Stairs, bridges, walkways, and every technical trail feature was assessed and inventoried. In the spring of 2020, staff were again tasked with updating an inventory of newly constructed, unauthorized trails as a result of several complaints from residents in the Sunshine Falls neighborhood. It would appear as if much of this new trail construction was a result of the COVID-19 lockdown restrictions, resulting in many people being home from work and seeking outdoor activities. Parks saw an increase in illegally constructed trails, not only on Seymour, but across the district throughout many of our parks. As previously mentioned, over the past 2 years, staff have worked hard to inventory and complete an assessment of trail conditions on Seymour. In addition to GIS mapping, staff reviewed each trail in sections with a focus on the environment. Trails were not necessarily studied from a safety and risk management perspective, but it was not completely forgotten within the scope of the project. The main study objectives over the summers of 2018 and 19 were environmental impact and sustainability. The main environmental impacts that were assessed were off-trail impacts, surface water flow and drainage, impacts to vegetation, impacts to environmentally sensitive areas, treadwear, and the use of native material versus imported material for construction and maintenance. Trails were assessed on an as-is basis to capture an accurate reflection of their current state. Concurrently in 2019, staff also inventoried and assessed constructed features, including technical trail features on mountain bike trails. Height, length, width, construction materials, approximate age, and structural integrity and stability were all assessed. As construction features which are poorly built or in disrepair provide high risk to trail users, some features were recommended for removal out of an abundance of caution. Those structures were removed over the course of the next few months as staff resources allowed. With all of this information in hand, staff prepared very preliminary recommendations for each trail as a starting point. However, none have been adopted or shared publicly, as the trail plan on Seymour will need to involve a significant amount of public input and discussion. Trail user groups and PNIAC would be consulted, as would residents of the Sunshine Falls community. As part of the 2019 constructed features study, a large focus was placed on technical trail features, or TTFs. These are the features that are constructed on mountain bike trails and are designed to present challenge to mountain bikers. They are above and beyond structures such as ladder bridges or boardwalks, which primarily serve as a means of crossing wet areas or creeks and streams. During the assessment of these TTFs, feature condition and environmental impacts were considered. The TTFs on Seymour are in large part designed and built in place using materials from the forest floor. Very little, if any, formal engineering has gone into the design and construction of these TTFs, and often these structures are a source of considerable environmental damage. Borrow pits or holes dug in the forest floor to access buildable mineral soils are often large and left open near trail boundaries. Obviously, these pits damage forest floor, affecting drainage, impacting root zones of trees, and are a potential hazard if left near the edges of trails. Wood used for building is often sourced from large cedar logs on the forest floor. On a recently discovered unsanctioned trail construction project, live trees had been felled to access buildable cedar wood. These methods of construction are not sustainable, safe, or environmentally mindful. Whereas on Fromme, under the Fromme Mountain Sustainable Trail Use and Classification Plan, best management practices have been developed which outline acceptable construction and material sourcing methods. It is our hopes to eventually transfer these BMPs to Seymour under the strategic plan. However, as much of the construction on Seymour is currently done on unsanctioned trails, it is difficult for staff to enforce these BMPs. As with trail construction assessment, the structures assessments were completed on an as-is basis in order to gain an understanding of the current condition and the potential work required to bring structures up to the standards seen on Fromme. Preliminary and very basic management recommendations were made for these structures. However, only those deemed highest risk were recommended for removal at this time. As a result of COVID lockdowns, trail use across the district soared. As such, there was a corresponding increase in illegally constructed trails and trail sections right across the district. While staff worked quickly and diligently to decommission and close these illegal trails in easy access locations, such as community parks, before they became permanent fixtures, it became evident that illegal trail building was ramping up in difficult access areas on Seymour. In spring of this year, in response to specific complaints, staff located several newly built trails, specifically in the dark side area of Seymour. Two of these trails proved to be very developed, however, in very difficult to access locations. Environmental damage was significant, and many mature trees had been felled to construct the trails. Staff worked diligently to inventory and assess the impact of these trails. Through their GPS inventory, staff discovered that these trails initiated on BC Parks land, traversed district land, and then exited out onto private road in Sunshine Falls. A joint decision was made with BC Parks to swiftly close these trails. A coordinated team of staff from both agencies spent several days decommissioning the two trails and making them impassable. Due to the remote nature of these trails and the difficult access, environmental restoration works by staff has proven to be extremely challenging. However, it is our hopes with the development of a strategic plan, we can incorporate some restoration works into future trail plans in this area. Armed with valuable trail inventories and assessments, park staff have developed a basic framework which will begin to guide more fulsome planning on Seymour. The key trail values that staff will work towards are environmental protection, ecological sustainability, sustainable trail infrastructure, and multi-use access. These are the same basic values that were adopted when the Fromme plan was developed and have driven much of the trail work throughout the district. As mentioned earlier, to date, much of the work has been done by park staff on a part-time basis. However, as we are now at a critical point in the planning process, Parks will be applying for a budget request to retain a dedicated staff person to move this planning project forward. It is anticipated that the next steps of this process would be completed over the next 1 to 2 years. Public consultation and data gathering will be key steps. There are many stakeholders and trail users who cannot be forgotten throughout this process. Parks would work with communications to develop an engagement process with the public. At this point, we envision surveys, trail user counts, consultation with trail user groups, and discussions with adjacent land managers will all help staff develop initial plans and recommendations for the trail network. These recommendations would then be reviewed and finalized before being presented to Council with an eye to adoption. Subject to funding and approval, additional operating budgets would be applied for trail maintenance and upkeep on an annual basis. Staff will explore a similar maintenance model as is in place on Fromme, including dedicated parks trail crews, trail maintenance contractors, volunteers, and resources from adjacent land managers on their portions of the applicable trails. As staff begin this planning initiative, we'll have a solid basis from which a framework can be built. The Fromme Mountain Sustainable Trail Use and Classification Plan and the Fromme Mountain Trails Environmental Assessment documents offer valuable insights, background information, and best management practices that can be adapted to Seymour. While the ecological assessment will obviously be very different on Seymour, the guiding principles are the same. Preservation of the forest, first and foremost. While many of the BMPs developed for Fromme will likely be adopted, staff recognize that some are outdated, need updating, are not applicable, or need refinement. Development of Seymour-specific BMPs will be key to this process. Obviously, staff will not develop these BMPs exclusive of additional input from key stakeholders in the community. While Fromme was developed as one cohesive unit, Seymour is much more of a patchwork of land boundaries and cannot really be treated as one cohesive entity. In order to better refine the areas in which parks will focus their efforts on Seymour, staff have already developed 4 distinct management zones. These are Berkeley Hyannis, Central Seymour, Cove Forest, and the Dark Side. Each area has its own unique issues, both environmental and ecological, as well as different trail users. While the planning process will have an overarching goal, each of the management zones will have a slightly different recommendation tailored to its specific area, use, and collaboration with adjacent land managers, who will likely have slightly different management priorities. To date, Metrovan is the only land manager who has developed a trail plan. However, BC Parks and CMHC are currently in the very early stages of the planning process. In early January, Metrovan will be initiating a North Shore Trails group to bring land managers together to share thoughts and ideas. Building on the management zones listed in the previous slide, park staff have prioritized these zones with respect to the approach moving forward. The order in which the zones appear on the map, from west to east, is how the trail recommendations will likely be implemented. The primary reason behind this decision is fairly simple: access in relation to high-density neighborhoods. COVID-19 clearly illustrated that Berkeley Hyannis was by far one of the most popular trail use areas in the district, let alone on Seymour. Conversely, the Dark Side remains one of the least used area, typically only frequented by experienced mountain bikers and hardcore hikers. Access to and parking within the Dark Side are 2 key factors behind the lower user counts. Central Seymour and Cove Forest share approximately the same amount of use, as each has its own unique draws and access points. Central Seymour has Parkgate, Old Buck, and Mushroom parking lots in close proximity, while Cove Forest has fairly easy access from Deep Cove. With all 4 management zones, parks will endeavor to follow some main guiding principles, being multi-use trails where appropriate, all access trails where possible, provision of hiking-only loops if practical, and protection of sensitive areas everywhere. Protection of sensitive areas has already allowed park staff to begin work on some quick wins in the Berkeley Hyannis area. Over the past few summers, staff have worked towards minor trail realignments, closing of excessively braided trail sections, and installation of restoration planting in heavily compacted areas. Staff have also set a course for the installation of riparian area exclusion fencing in some locations, physical barriers across unnecessary trails, increased plantings, and better wayfinding for certain trails that as a means of keeping people out of these sensitive areas. Staff will continue with this work and pilot initial trail recommendations in the Berkeley Hyannis area first. Obviously, a trail planning exercise such as this will involve feedback from the public. Parks will work in close collaboration with our communications department to develop a strategy to best engage with the public throughout the process. At this early stage, we expect the engagement could include surveys, website content, and the use of social media like Twitter and Facebook, inviting the public to participate in shaping the direction of a strategic trail plan for Seymour. As was the Fromme study, the Seymour Strategic Trails Plan will be a large undertaking with many moving parts. It will require collaborative effort from staff, the public, and adjacent landowners. It is Parks' hopes to begin the next phase of this important process over the next year. Beginning in 2021, initial planning steps will be taken, a project team will be developed, and a public consultation strategy will be finalized. Throughout the year, public consultation, data gathering, analysis, and development of draft recommendations will be undertaken with the hopes of having a document outlining preliminary recommendations being ready sometime in 2022. Once final recommendations are completed, presented, and adopted by Mayor and Council, a maintenance agreement would be struck and the plan implemented in key areas. As implementation on a broad scale will have capacity issues which will need to be resolved. Staff would then monitor the plan over the next few years and make any necessary changes through an adaptive management framework. It is our hopes that over the next few years, we will be able to create a high-quality, sustainable, multi-use trail network that recognizes the importance of environmental protection, is ecologically sustainable, and provides access to nature for a wide range of trail users for generations to come. I thank you for your time this evening.